It's time to break down the X's and O's on Giants Rewind. What is this happy night here? A New York Giants podcast.
Welcome back to the newest edition of the Giants Rewind podcast. John Schmeelk with you, today's guest, former Giants tight end and part of our broadcast crew, Howard Cross. First, I want to remind you that you can find the Giants Rewind podcast as part of our podcast network. Make sure you go to Giants.com, the Giants mobile app, or any of your favorite podcast platforms to find the Giants podcast network, which is presented by Investors Bank. And now we're joined by our guest. He is Howard Cross, former Giants tight end, part of our broadcast team, normally our sideline reporter, now our in the first 10 rows of the stands reporter. Howard, what's going on, man? How are you, bud?
Nothing much. How you doing? How you doing this morning?
Howard, we're good, and we wake up to good news, though I guess I fell asleep to it. I'm not sure how long you stayed up last night. But the Philadelphia Eagles lose to the Seattle Seahawks, and the Giants tied for first place with Washington. And since they beat them twice this year with the tiebreaker, the Giants technically, Howard, heading into week number 13 in the National Football League in first place in the NFC East. Who would have believed it?
Who would have believed it? But, with every good news, bit of news, there's a little bit of bad news among them, But it's kind of cool that they kind of pulled it together. They kept fighting. The defense has really shown itself and been able to get better week in and week out, which has been very impressive to me. The offensive line is starting to, not so great maybe all the time on the pass protection, but the run game has definitely picked up, which is also great. You would think that would be almost lost without Saquon, but no, they've done a great job all the way around.
No question about it, and we will get to that Daniel Jones injury. That is obviously a big thing we need to talk about. But let's start with the defense, Howard, because I think you hit it out of the park. In all the Giants' victories this year, they have not allowed more than 20 points. 20 points was the most number of points that they've allowed in one of their wins. They've taken the ball away 10 times in their 4 wins. They've scored 30 points off those takeaways. How have you seen this defense grow since we saw them on the field for the first time in week 1 of this season?
Week 1 of the season, they weren't, believe it or not, they weren't as bad as everybody thought they were. They were playing against a really good Pittsburgh team. And the only time they really got kind of out of sorts was when they played against San Francisco. But every game you can see the interior defensive line, they look, pretty stout in there against the run, and they're getting a lot of pressure in the pass. We were like, oh man, Lorenzo Carter goes down. What are we going to do for pass rush? And they picked it up even. Seems like they've gotten better at it with some of the guys that are in there in the rotations. Logan Ryan out there in the secondary is playing great. You thought that with McKinney out, what were they going to do? But the secondary's picked up even more. And Blake Martinez is like, the godsend linebacker, being able to play on all 3 downs, being able to control, what's going on. The quarterback out there in the middle of the field, getting everybody set up. It looks pretty interesting.
So as an offensive player, Howard, the Giants right now are a zone-heavy team, but they do a lot of different things to try to confuse quarterbacks pre-snap as to what type of zone they're going to be in. Speak from your perspective as someone that had to deal with stuff like that as a pro. When you're not quite sure what zone that defense you're going up against is in, how does that affect how a passing game is going to operate when a team pre-snap might be showing a cover 3, but they really dip into a cover 2? Maybe they're showing, a zone, but they go into that 2 safety, deep man under look. How does that affect an offensive passing game when a team can disguise so well pre-snap?
It affects it this way. The quarterback and the receivers have to be on the same page. Like when you're out and running a route, and you're just from the tight end standpoint, and you're running an out route, just going to go up 8 yards and bump and head towards the sideline. Either you're going to sprint to the sideline wide open and try to catch the ball, or you're going to have to pull up before you get there because there's going to be a corner sitting out there because he didn't drop back. He wound up rolling up in the cover 2 and sitting outside. You don't want to run into that guy. He could, unfortunately, hurt you or intercept the ball. So you have to see the same thing the quarterback seeing. If you're coming across the field, you have to know whether they're dropping back, if they're dropping back into a 2-deep or a 4-deep cover, just so you'll know exactly, am I running across? Am I getting a little deeper? You have to be able to see that. And if the quarterback and you are not on the same page, if you're not recognizing the same thing, routes get slower and confused. You saw it last night in the Eagles game, where a couple times receivers slowed down and the quarterback threw the ball into an open space, no interception or anything, and people were like, well, what's going on? I'm like, they're not able to communicate with each other, like what they're seeing.
Yeah, you had the same.
So
and you had the interception in the end zone too, where he's trying to throw to Goddard. Wentz read that the fact the linebacker had the inside leverage. He thought Goddard was going to go out. Goddard went in anyway, and all of a sudden that turns into a pick. And Carson Wentz looks like a terrible quarterback, but the tight end did not go the right way based on the leverage of the defense.
yeah, and you have to be like it's imperative, especially when they're trying to disguise coverages. When you've heard quarterbacks in the past from other teams, oh, we're seeing ghosts, meaning they're seeing things that they thought they saw. And it's hard for receivers and quarterbacks to be on the same page to begin with. And sometimes if you're trying to be quick with your offense or, raise the tempo, it's hard to raise the tempo when you're throwing the ball if you're looking downfield and they're moving from coverage to coverage.
It is. And I think, Howard, a reason the Giants have been so effective in these coverages has to be their play of their safeties. And you mentioned Logan Ryan. We saw early on in that last game, I think it was the first drive, he jumped a deep in cut, made Brandon Allen hold on to the ball, and I think that was the play that Leonard Williams managed to sack, if I'm not mistaken, it was, and that short-circuited a drive. And then Jabril Peppers, while Logan Ryan handles the back end, Jabril Peppers has been just a really, really good player, being very aggressive around the line of scrimmage. They just seem to complement each other really well, and they're both really smart players to me, which allows them to really execute this defense.
Well, I think Logan has with his play and his style and the way he's understood things has increased probably Peppers' study habits and everything. Peppers has grown as a player, and you've watched him grow from week one to now. Like, he understands things more. If he's inside putting pressure on the running game, yes, he's doing that. But when it's time for him to step back into coverage, he seems to be in the right position every time, and that's been really cool to watch. And again, that's just because it's competition in the secondary. You don't want your guy you don't want your buddy or your guy to be the only guy, quote unquote, making plays back there. You want to make plays also.
All right, and let's talk about the run defense, because you can't really do all that disguising back there if you have to have that extra safety close to the line of scrimmage to stop the run. The Giants don't have to do that, because you mentioned it, Blake Martinez, you mentioned it, Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, Dalvin Tomlinson. These guys up front, Howard, have been able to stop the run while the Giants have been able to show a two-safety deep coverage, which allows you to do whatever you want back there, and it gives you that flexibility. Why do you think this front has been so effective against the run this season?
Well, as far as Tomlinson has been going, he, ever since the exit of Snacks, he's just been growing as a player, and they've even made him captain. So you can see that his play is picked up tremendously. I think that Williams he's in there trying to not only prove that he's deserving of a top flight draft pick, which he was. He's like a number one draft pick, I think, for the Jets.
Yep.
But he also wants people to notice, like, hey, look, I'm doing it. And of course, you got Lawrence in there, who was a first round pick. So you basically got three high draft picks playing in the middle, playing like high draft picks, and that's what you want to see.
And what kind of impact is having Blake Martinez there in the middle, who never seems to be in the wrong spot? He's effective in zone defense. They've done a great job, Howard, coming in. Everyone, and we've seen it too. He's not the guy you want trailing a tight end down the seam or, covering a really quick running back in spacing coverage one-on-one. But as a zone defender, he drops in the right spots. He reads the quarterbacks. He's really good and solid in the run game, filling those gaps. What does it do when you have someone in the middle like that is always going to be in the right spot depending on what defense you're in?
Well, he nullifies things that that the teams want. Teams want to be ahead of the sticks in the first play. So you got these three guys up front or four guys up front that they're wreaking havoc constantly. Then when there's maybe a hole, Blake Martinez flies through the hole and makes the tackle. That's problem number one for any offense that we're playing against, is that he's making a tackle almost instantly when there's a chance. If you run a screen, it's usually him or one of the interior linemen who are making that tackle. So they're almost eliminating the screen game by how quickly they're able to react to the ball and get to the ball. So again, if you're behind the sticks, you're trying to run a screen to get things started, he's got you. You run the draw. He seems to make almost every tackle on the draw, because the draw, you're trying to sneak a play in, thinking that you're going to get it by. If he's in the game, he's making the tackle. The intermediate stuff is where he's living. To have a player in the game that's that sure of a tackler, that always seems to step with the correct foot, heading downhill towards plays, is invaluable in the first two downs that will put guys behind the sticks and make it harder for them in third down scenarios.
No question about it. And then finally on the defense, Howard, let's talk about the pass rush a little bit. Because I think both of us thought before the season started they don't have that one big edge guy unless Lorenzo Carter could step up, and now he's injured. But they've managed to produce a good enough pass rush here on a week-in, week-out basis to make the plays you need. They've gotten big sacks at big times late in games when other teams are trying to, win or tie the game. How has Patrick Graham been able to put everything together to develop a pass rush without having that 1A outside edge rusher?
Well, what he's done is he's created a tremendous amount of pressure up front. And what I mean by up front, that means right in the interior of the line. When you get guys pushed back on your toes, it's hard for the quarterback to step up. He's making sure these guys have lane integrity, and they're staying on the outside edges to try to keep guys in the pocket. So when you're getting pressure right up the middle and there are guys coming around the edges, you're like, okay, I'll just step up in the pocket. If there's nowhere to step up, there's nowhere to throw the ball, and you get sacks. It doesn't look like the most glamorous kind of thought process, but it's perfect. It works against almost every kind of quarterback. Those running quarterbacks that you're so worried about, if he gets out on the edge, what's he going to do? You never let him out on the edge. You keep him in the pocket, and you just keep putting pressure up the middle. The guys who are throwing out of the quote-unquote the bucket, it's too hard to throw out of the bucket when people are crashing down on both sides of you. So he's figured out a way to keep these guys, the front four. They're not, jailbreakers or whatever you call it, but they are very effective at what they're doing. And he's just saying, hey, look, do your job. Stay in your lane, do your job, beat your guy. And a lot of times it's, if the guys are looking in the secondary and he's trying to figure out if it's a cover 2 or cover 1 or cover 4, is it quarter hat? What am I looking at? If he takes more than the time that he needs, these guys are all over him.
Hey, Giant fans, get a New York Giants checking account from Investors Bank with a Giants-branded debit card, security features, and discounts at the Giants online shop. You can earn up to $250 when you open an account at investorsbank.com/Giants. Member FDIC. All right, Howard, let's jump to the offensive side of the ball, and obviously it starts with the quarterback, and we don't know right now whether Daniel Jones is going to play this week on Sunday against Seattle. Head coach Joe Judge spoke on Monday, said basically we have more questions now than answers. The MRI didn't reveal a huge tear or something like that, but as you well know, the hamstring, that really doesn't matter, and we saw Daniel Jones look pretty spry on the sideline before he went back into the game, and then the minute he tries to throw a pass, he saw he couldn't push off that back leg to make a throw. So as someone that I'm sure during your career has dealt with hamstring injuries, what's this process going to be like for Jones, who I'm sure wants to play, is going to try to fight his way back to get back on the field and make sure he doesn't go too fast where he can injure it worse, and then all of a sudden you're in a lot of trouble?
Well, first off, I'm not a doctor, so I can't really tell you everything, but from what I've watched over the past, that hamstrings are special, especially with guys that run, that have any kind of speed about them. And if you tweak it or if you twinge, the moment it starts to feel like it's pulling, like it scares you. You don't go into it thinking like, oh, I can press through this moment. You've seen players all over the league, even a player like Julio Jones, who never leaves the field, seems like. They say he has a hamstring, he disappears. Okay, well, he's out. Like it's not something that you can quote unquote judge or gauge or explain. Like he showed that it was hurting him when he was trying to throw the ball.
Right.
Like not running, not cutting, just trying to push off and use that hamstring, which you don't really think about that you're using that when you're throwing the ball. You saw how much he uses his hamstrings, and everybody does when they're throwing the ball. So that's a no-no. He can't force that. He can't figure that out. How long does it take? I hope it doesn't take long, but the reality of it is guys usually miss 3 to 4 weeks with it.
Right, and we'll see. Hopefully he can get back quicker than that. Obviously, every game is important right now, Howard. If Colt McCoy does have to step in, they'll obviously have the same offense in terms of the plays and the system and all that stuff. But how does Jason Garrett maybe slightly tweak the way he calls the game if he has Colt McCoy behind center instead of Daniel Jones?
Okay, so, a lot of fans probably don't know a lot about Colt McCoy. He was like one of the leaders, I don't know if he is the leader in Texas football history down there at the University of Texas, even I think with wins and win percentage over his history, I think, in the NFL. He's roughly a 60+% passer, even with his few times in that he's played. Doesn't throw a lot of interceptions, doesn't make a lot of mistakes when he's in games. When they need him, he's a quality backup. A lot of people thought he was going to be like a starting quarterback in the league when he was first starting. So I think a lot of that, them changing the game plan, may not be as much as you think. Believe it or not, the kid's got some quick feet as well. So he's not probably a 4.5 40 guy or like a Daniel, but he's pretty fast. So I don't think it's going to change as much as people think. I think that they may pare it down to make sure that he's on top of it, but I believe that Cole's he's a pro's pro, so he's been working as if he had to play the entire time. So he will know the plays, know the calls. He'll be ready with the receivers and make sure they're all on the same page and they're all seeing the same thing. And if he can do that, I mean, that's going to be a good moment for him.
All right, Howard, it's gonna mean that the running game has to continue to be effective. And, Wayne Gallman, all of us are fans. We've talked about him on the radio broadcast a lot over the past couple of years. And fortunately for him, he had the opportunity last year. He got hurt, and then he lost it. This year, he stayed healthy, and he's making the most of his opportunity. This downhill running game, while maybe not getting some of those super explosive plays that they got when Saquon was here, that's fine. But they're getting consistent positive yardage, which is putting the team in pretty advantageous third downs. That's going to become even more important now if they're going to rely on their backup quarterback.
Well, they're going to put a lot of pressure on everybody with the running game. That is basically the basis of their entire offense, where all the play action and everything comes off of what they're doing in that running game. I think that what's been happening is, is the quick one cut downhill, let's get started kind of movement, running off the edge of and right off the butt of every blocker is what this kid's been doing the entire time, and what we've been so impressed with. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Teams are going to pull up everyone to try to stop the running game and force Colt to throw the ball. I don't think that's a smart idea by the teams, but, let's see what happens.
And what kind of improvement have you seen in this offensive line in both the run and the pass?
I think the rotation of offensive linemen has forced guys to study and want to get their assignments more. I don't know how it's affected them personally, but I know if it were me, I would not want a player coming in to quote-unquote spell me, or to quote-unquote he runs these type plays better, or I got a sequence of plays for him and a sequence of plays for me. So I'd be working really hard to try to keep more of my time on the field, and I believe that's what's happening with the guys that are on the field now. Because they're having to rotate in and out, they are working twice as hard to make sure that every rep they get is a perfect rep, and it shows on the field. It's a mental thing for them to have to quote unquote give up some playing time to quote to make sure that everybody's making sure the plays are correct. It makes them nuts.
And Howard, we didn't see much of a change in the effectiveness or the strategy. At least I didn't think, with the offensive line, with the new offensive line coach in there, Dave DeGuglielmo. Did you see any difference, any change in the way they're going about things with him coaching for the first time on that line?
No, I thought that it turned out that they pretty much had a game plan. They have blocking schemes already kind of set up, so they all kind of rolled through it, and I think that helped them all out. I don't think that, when you're changing offensive coordinators, you may be changing plays. When you're changing head coaches, you may be changing whole systems. Even quarterback coaches may even sequence receivers a different way when he's looking at it. But when you change offensive line coaches, there's not a huge change. And the reason why is because the scheme is already set up and you got to block it. Now, you may have to, you may change a couple techniques that you're using within the scheme, but you're going to be blocking the same scheme.
All right, Howard, let's talk about Evan Engram. He had some really great plays. Then he had the play you won back, which seems to be kind of his pattern, unfortunately, over the course of his career. But when we talk about him as a quote-unquote matchup nightmare, that's what we saw in this game. They said they found Cincinnati in man-on-man defense. They identified Engram one-on-one. On that first play against Von Bell, he just runs by him. Great pass by Jones, really big pass play. On the other play, he catches a contested ball on the left side of the field. So that's the good Engram. That's the Engram that kind of gets you excited. And you're like, boy, man, if we can harness this and just put that in a bottle and jar and just unleash it when we need it, that guy can be a special player. Then, of course, he had the catch and fumble in the middle of the field.
I mean, man, it's hard to like when you're looking at these guys like Kelsey and all these guys around the league. You're like, we got one of those guys on our team, but our guy doesn't seem to be able to be 100% consistent. And the problem isn't that he's not 100% consistent. It's that you need to make so many good plays that your bad play that you make is a non-existent play. And I think that's where his issues lie for the fans and for everyone who's watching him, is that okay, like if he'd have scored 2 touchdowns and had a long catch, the fumble in the middle of the field we wouldn't be talking about today. But because he only has like a few good plays, and there's not that many plays to be had because the team is like, they're growing. They're a growing team, whether we like to explain it or not. They've rebuilt everything, and they're growing. As they're growing and trying to become, quote-unquote, a better team, you need guys to step up and be that, quote-unquote, workhorse, that bell cow that you want. You need everybody to be, unfortunately, Daniel or Saquon Barkley, and you just don't really have everybody being that playing at that level. Right now, his issue is that one play seems to come at a critical point in the game for them. If they're dependent on you to make plays, if you're supposed to be their go-to guy, quote unquote, and if you're the go-to guy, they got to come to you. When they come to you, you have to make the play.
And Howard, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. No. Go ahead.
Yeah, if he starts putting games out of reach, it's not a big deal. But until he does,
yeah, it's a problem. I'm with you. Now, I think he's been better as a blocker, too, to be honest with you. I think this new blocking scheme has helped him. I think when he was trying to do a lot of those reach blocks and stuff in the outside zone, I think he had a lot of issues. But it seems like when he's participating in some of these double team blocks and just sealing the back edge, he's not a guy you're going to run behind at the point of attack still. But I think he's done a much better job not allowing penetration and things like that to blow up some of these run plays for losses.
Well, he probably watched a lot of Jay Novacek film from back in the day, because Jay was a pretty good blocker back in the day, but he was never the point of attack. He just kind of laid in there behind Larry Allen or one of those big guys and made sure that the ball carrier, if he had to cut back, he had like a little space in there, but he wasn't really worried about it because he wasn't the point of attack. All he had to do was just get in the way. Even falling from the guy would slow the guy down. And his play was a successful play. Like Ingram's doing more than that. I don't want to discredit what he's doing, but that's the kind of scheme they've kind of put him in, is to keep him out on the edge and keep him away from, quote unquote, being the point of attack or the lead blocker from the edge. So he's been doing a good job, even when he's double teaming with another tight end. He's that helps his effort and helps his energy be higher when he's in that position.
All right, Howard. Finally, let's kind of handicap this NFC East a little bit. So Giants and Washington tied at the top of the division. Eagles a half game back. Dallas a full game back. There's still 5 games to play, so there's a lot that can happen. And obviously we don't know about Daniel Jones, but how do you see this division the rest of the way playing out? And even though the Giants seem to have Washington's number, at least to me, Howard, they seem to be playing the best brand of football. Whether or not they have the most talent is a different question, but frankly, it's one to me that's almost irrelevant right now, because you want to talk about the teams that are playing better football. Right now, Washington's playing good football, the Giants are playing good football, and they're tied for first place.
Well, here's how you handicap it. You got Alex Smith, the comeback player of the year, with that gruesome injury in Washington. He's probably right now, with the quarterbacks that are quote unquote available to play, the lead dog in the house. He's ahead of Colt McCoy because just generally Alex was a starter for years. He's ahead of the guy down in Dallas, the Red
Dalton.
Rocket.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and he's ahead of Wentz in Philly, because Wentz is just, he's a mental case right now. I don't know what's going on with that kid, but so you have the best quarterback playing with not necessarily the best offensive weapons, but with the best defense right now. So Washington has the lead, and they have the weaker schedule going forward. They played all the tough teams that the Giants still have left. The Giants still have Cleveland. The Giants still have not Cincinnati, but Seattle. The Giants still have
Arizona.
So they still have a couple of tough games coming down the road that they got to get through, and Washington's kind of already done that.
Yeah, I'll tell you very quickly what Washington's schedule is. I'm bringing it up here, Howard. Their toughest game is against Pittsburgh, and that's this week. They're at the Steelers, but then after that, to your point, they play San Francisco, who, by the way, is not a bad team.
Oh, no. That's a tougher game than they're not going to win that one.
They've watched for the 49ers have a very good defense, just beat the first place Rams. They have Seattle after that at home. Then they have the Panthers at home, and then they're going to Philadelphia to close out the year. So it's certainly not an easy schedule. They don't have Baltimore on there, and they get Seattle at home instead of Seattle on the road, which does make a difference even with no crowd there. So to me, Howard, I think we're going to be talking the next 3 or 4 weeks, 5 weeks, where I think whatever happens in that final week of the season is probably in one way, shape, or form going to determine who wins the NFC East.
Well, it's going to be more of who can get by these next 3 weeks. If Colt can really come in and step in and not make mistakes, not turn the ball over, and keep kind of status quo in the offense, then the Giants have a shot.
They do.
After watching them last night, they're a good team, but Russell gives up a lot of sacks, and if you can get to him and get some sacks, all of a sudden, the Giants are going to make more plays. Well, they were going to make more plays. If Colt can kind of fit in, they're going to make more plays than Philadelphia made.
Yeah,
so they're the chance for the Giants to beat Seattle.
Yeah,
so if the Giants beat Seattle, then all bets are off.
Yeah, I thought the Eagles' defense actually played pretty well last night, to be honest with you. I thought they were sticking to those receivers pretty well. Now DK Metcalf makes his plays because the man's a human freak show. How do you stop that guy, by the way, Howard? That guy is just a menace.
Well,
holy cow.
Well, you have to do kind of what Jalen Ramsey did. You got to bump him off the line and then run with him. And then when he starts to look back, you got to make a play on the ball. You can't try to make a play where you're going to break it out of his hands. If he gets his hands on it, you're not pulling anything out of his hands. So Jalen Ramsey kind of did the bump and run, or when he laid off of him, he was running, trying to interrupt his route to make him slow down. Once he started to slow down, Jalen watched his hands. When he started to reach to the ball, Jalen turned to face the quarterback to put his hands up to try to knock the ball away. That's the way to defend him. If he gets his hands on it, or if he gets separation, you're lost. So if you're not going to give up separation, you got to play the ball a lot, and you got to know when it's in the air, and that's the only way to stop him.
And how about Russell Wilson? You mentioned he took a couple sacks last night. What do the Giants' defense have to do to keep him contained as a runner and as a thrower and prevent some of those big pass plays down the field? We know Russell is probably the best, or at least one of the best, deep ball throwers in the league.
Yeah, just a lot of lane integrity and know that he's going deep. Never, the safety should never let those guys get behind. Not just the Big Mac, but they can't let either two of the guys get behind them. And the way to do that is lane integrity, keep him in his pocket, in his spot. After you keep him in his spot, you go deep as the deepest guy. That's how you do it. Metcalf is not going to. If you know he's going deep, stay deep. If he catches it crossing the field, you can't be trailing him. Because if you're trailing him, he catches a crossing pattern.
It's over.
He can run for 300 yards at that point before you get close to him. It's just not. It's not something you want to do. You got to have a guy over the top of Metcalf the whole time, making the other receiver have to beat you. But Metcalf can't be the guy that's going to beat you. And the way to do that is to keep Russell in the pocket, make him throw up and over. Because you saw when he throws up and over, he throws a deep ball. Great. It's not always on target. And that's where his interceptions come.
Howard, good stuff, my friend. Really enjoyed it. We'll talk to you on Sunday. We'll be back at the facility as the team travels to Seattle to take on the Seahawks. Thank you, Howard. Stay safe this week, my friend. See you on Sunday.
See you on Sunday.
That's Giants tight end Howard Cross, part of our broadcast team. We thank him for joining us on the Giants Rewind podcast, which is, of course, part of the Giants Podcast Network, which is presented by Investors Bank. Make sure you check out the archive of all of our podcasts, including Giants Rewind, the Giants Huddle podcast, which is our long-form interview podcast, and Big Blue Kickoff Live, our daily call-in show every weekday at noon, where we talk Giants football with fans. For Howard Cross, I'm John Schmeelk. The Giants take on the Seahawks at Sunday, trying to hold on to first place in the NFC East. We'll talk to you then, everybody. Stay safe.